Hello, welcome to the Jackie Tan Show. I'm so happy you're here. This show is all about human performance, the human experience, and everything that it takes to live a life that is truly aligned with you, that makes you happy, fulfilled, that challenges you, and that makes you want to get up every day and just smash the day because you are pumped. That's what this show is about. And I have the absolute honor and pleasure to have conversations with incredible people doing incredible things, living incredible values. And I really just love talking to people. And I have this insane curiosity for why people choose to do things the way they do them, the path that they take, how they even, build the courage to go down a path that is not yet forged. And I love having these conversations, and I hope you do too. If you're here, then I gather that you do. So thank you for being here. This episode today is with the incredible Drew Manning. He is the name and face behind the brand Fit to Fat to Fit. And he did exactly that. He was incredibly fit. He's a trainer and he's telling people how to train. But that was kind of the problem, because he was telling people who are not like him, fit, strong, healthy, disciplined, really great habits, how to lose weight. And so that being the problem, he decided, because he couldn't connect with his clients, he didn't know what it meant to, feel the way they did. And so in order to build that empathy, he got fat. 6 months worth of just eating as much as he wanted to put on the weight so that he understood what it meant and what it took to then lose that weight. There are a lot of lessons learnt, and the pure connection you get to have with someone when you walk a mile in their shoes. It's an incredible conversation. He's so incredibly insightful, and obviously has gained a lot of wisdom from having walked in the shoes of his clients too. So it was a wonderful conversation. Enjoy this episode with Drew Manning. Drew, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jackie, for having me on. Appreciate it.
Your story is so fascinating to me, because you, on purpose and twice, decided to dedicate 6 months to putting on weight. And you're an incredible fitness trainer who has been this way for a very long time. So I can assume that this would be really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But what I want to know is, and what I think we should start with, is why you decided to do this.
Sure. So let's back up to 2011 is when I did my first experiment. The why behind it had a little bit to do with my background. So I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters, and we all played sports. So I was very active, very fit, in shape my entire life. Fast forward to 2009, I became certified as a personal trainer, started taking on clients. I had a passion for health and fitness. And so I decided to become a personal trainer. And here I was, someone who had never been overweight a day in my life, trying to help people who were overweight pretty much every day of their life. And I couldn't understand why it was so hard for them. I had a client who told me, he's like, Drew, you don't understand how hard it is for me, or for people like me, because for you, it's been easy your whole life. And I was like, you know what, you're right. That's true. And so I kind of was exploring that thought. And for whatever reason, the idea of getting fat on purpose, as crazy as that sounds, it kind of entered my mind, and it felt like a calling, like I was being called to do this crazy experiment. I called all my friends, my family, and I was like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And everyone was like, oh my gosh, that would be totally crazy. You should totally do it. So I ran with it in 2011. I, started my own website. I started my own YouTube channel, and I was like, I'm going to try this out and see how it goes. And so my intention behind it was to gain a better understanding of what it was like to be overweight, because I'd never been overweight. and I wanted to better understand. And I feel like if I had a better understanding, I could better help people, and maybe it could change some people's lives. I had no idea it would go viral. I had no idea it would go international, and it would just kind of blow up. And it was a big surprise in that happening. But for 6 months I couldn't exercise, so no exercise for 6 months. I ate a standard American diet, which we can dive into how unhealthy that is. And I put on 75 pounds, 30-ish kilos, in 6 months' time of pure fat, and then was able to luckily lose it again. And that's why the journey is called Fit to Fat to Fit. But I gained so many valuable lessons along the way, and I was truly, truly humbled. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done.
There's so many questions I have. What was the very first thing that you like epiphany, like a pivotal moment, like really struck you when you started this?
I would say a couple. Well, here's the thing. Like the first thing that I noticed was it was really fun to eat this food. The food tasted good.
Look at this easy.
The highly processed junk food we have here in America in abundance is delicious. I'm not going to lie. Like these companies spend millions of dollars on purpose to make this food as addictive as possible. And I'll be honest with you, like I'm a big fan of some of the food. Like it's cheap, it's affordable, it's convenient, and it tastes really, really good. And so the first like a couple weeks, I was like, this is fun, this is awesome. And then very quickly, I noticed it started affecting my sleep. My wife at the time was like, you're starting to snore. I noticed walking up and down the stairs after a couple of weeks, I was starting to like lose my breath. So my cardio was starting to go downhill. The cravings were pretty intense. I remember that. That was kind of like an aha moment. I would say the biggest thing though was a few months in, being like 30 pounds heavier for me felt like I was enormous. And I was because you have to understand my whole identity, my entire life, I was in my mind, I was Drew the fit guy. That was my identity that I had created for 30 years of my life. And I was so uncomfortable being overweight for the first time. I kind of freaked out. Like I wanted to go up to strangers in public and go to explain to them like, hey, I'm not really overweight. This is just an experiment. Like, here's my before picture. Go to this website. It'll explain everything. Like, I'm not really like overweight because I was so insecure and I kind of freaked out. I had an identity crisis because up until that point, my identity was built on my body image as my self-image. And I think a lot of people do this. We're conditioned to be this way, whether you're overweight your whole life or you're in shape your whole life or just whatever your body is. We create our body image as our self-image. And when your body changes, a lot of pregnant women can probably relate to this. You kind of freak out. You're like, wait a second, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. That my body is not a reflection of who I am. And so that was what the biggest aha moment was like, starting to realize that, I am not my body. My body's a part of me. My body can change. My body is not my identity. And I didn't realize that at the time, but looking back on it now, that was one of the first lessons that I learned.
So if you didn't realize that at the time, how did you manage your mindset, the psychology around that?
It came later after years of therapy. I went through a divorce maybe 5 years after this experiment. And that's where I started to do the inner work. And we'll all get into why that's important for everyone, not just me, but when I started to do the inner work on myself and to deconstruct maybe a lot of the thoughts and patterns that I developed over the years, I started to deconstruct all those perceptions of myself, of our society and who I am and how I fit in, and learning things about, what your identity is built on. And, for me, that was a really powerful lesson to think back on the Fit to Fat to Fit experiment and be like, I see now as, like when you realize who you are, a lot of people think like, I am, and then you insert your name. Well, your name, is that who you are? Or is that just your name? That's just your name. I am a dad. Okay. That's a label. Is that who you are? It's a part of who you are. All these things, your body image, all the labels that you carry, mom, dad, business owner, entrepreneur, the color of your skin, your religion, politics, all those things are part of you. But those things can all, be changed or altered, or and so what I've learned is that we as a society kind of like create identities based on those things, and we like attach ourselves to them. But when those things are shaken or changed, like your body can change if someone gains weight or loses a limb, you have to realize like, oh, maybe I'm not just that. I am more than just that thing, if that makes sense. And so that kind of came with doing the inner work, and realizing that after the fact. Good question, though.
So, who is Drew?
I am me. I am all those things. I am all those things combined, and they all make up who I am. And I'm not attached to any one of those things, meaning I don't create my identity around those things. I realize that those things can change, and I'm constantly changing. I'm constantly evolving. I think all of us are constantly changing and constantly evolving. And I've learned that if you create an identity around one of those things and one of those things changes, that's outside of your control, you are setting yourself up for an identity crisis. And this is what I've learned is not just with my fit to fat to fit experiments, but let's say with me as a dad. This is a perfect example. I have two daughters. They're 12 and 14 now. When they were daddy's little girls, like little princesses, when they were 5 and 7, 6 and 8, I had created an identity like I am a girl dad with these two, beautiful, perfect little girls. And we have so much fun together. We do all these fun things together. And then they became teenagers, and they didn't want anything to do with me. They kind of pushed me away. We weren't as close. And I had a huge identity crisis where I was like, who am I now that my daughters don't need me as much? And it was a dark period of time for me. No one, as a single parent, no one really prepared me for that. I know we're kind of getting off track here with talking about health and fitness, but this all kind of ties in to the whole creating an identity thing around that. And I set myself up for a huge, huge identity crisis because I lost my sense of purpose and my sense of identity of like, well, who am I now that my girls don't need me? And I've had to like rediscover who I am without that thing. Because my girls, I have to understand, they're not going to go back to being these little girls where they need me. They're growing up and becoming, beautiful, strong women. And for me, I have to like accept that. I have to like learn how to evolve and change. I can't fight what is. I've had to let go of control and surrender to it and find the beauty in this new version of me. And that's kind of how I've been able to navigate life. I'm like, okay, I see myself creating an identity around this, and I'm attaching myself to that identity. And if I do that again, like I've done in the past, there could be a huge identity crisis. And this goes for, marriages. So I went through that with my divorce, my marriage. After 10 years, we got divorced. That was a huge identity crisis. Who am I without my wife? The past 10 years, like now I have to discover who I am. And then around the same time, I left my religion. I was the same religion for the first 34 years of my life, and, went through a faith transition where I realized that religion isn't for me anymore. And it's not the true path for me anymore. So that was a huge identity crisis as well. And so I think I've had these identity crises along the way that have really humbled me. And I'm like, okay, I'm learning this lesson, not to attach myself too much to any one label that I wear, because it's painful when life changes. And so I've learned to kind of like say like, yes, I'm a dad. Yes, maybe, in the future I'll be a partner again, but not to create an identity of like, this is the only thing that I am. Like I see people do this with their politics or their religion, and they're so wrapped up in it that they can't see past it, and maybe life will change them and they'll eventually evolve past that. Then it's like, oh, who am I without that belief now? So there's some life lessons for you there for the audience, hopefully.
I love all of that. Firstly, you said we're going off track because this is health and fitness, but this is actually like, this impacts our health and well-being and how we show up. So yeah, it is all related. The other thing you said was, you're saying identity crises, and all of these things that have happened to you and the lessons that you've learned. But I mean, could we relabel that and say they're all just evolutions of your growth?
Yeah, you could say that too as well. I think that happens to every person in this life. I think
Mm,
I call it like the death rebirth process. There's old versions of us that have died and we've had to let go of because they no longer serve us.
mm,
I can't hold on to my girls being these little girls anymore, right?
mm.
I can't hold on to my body always looking the way it does because I'm aging. Like I'm getting wrinkles and gray hairs, and my hair is thinning, and I might not look this physique for into my 60s, 70s, 80s. You look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, like still a fit guy, but does he look like he did when he was in his 20s? No. We can't hold on to these things forever, and that the Latin word memento mori kind of comes to, I have a necklace of that, and it's a reminder that remember that you will die, and that reminder of mortality is an important lesson for all of us of like we're all going to die. So don't get too attached to these labels that you hold on to, and realize that you get to choose how you want to show up in this life, and you can create your own identity. Just don't get too attached to any one of those because they can change, they can evolve, and that's the beauty of this life, the mystery of it all.
Exactly. I love that. And I think we could put it like we could do another whole episode around that and how media and society tries to take advantage
Yeah,
of everyone in that sense as well. But getting back to your journey, you
yeah,
did say in the beginning what you found interesting was the cravings. I'd love to know how long were you in this were you doing it? Did you start to really notice the cravings? How long did it take?
yeah. So I ate that highly processed junk food for about 6 months straight. I don't know if you guys have the same food over there, but things like sugary cereals, sugary sodas, juices, granola bars, chips, cookies, crackers, white bread, white pasta, all the like frozen quick meals, and like things like top ramen and mac and cheese. And we have these things called Hot Pockets over here. They're delicious. So there's all this delicious processed food. The cravings, that's what's interesting. So I let go of working out, which used to be my stress reliever. Like that was my therapy, and then food became my stress reliever. But that creates a vicious cycle. And a lot of people get stuck in this vicious cycle. And this is why I have so much empathy for people that struggle with food addiction or weight loss or emotional eating, because I understand it so much better now on a deeper level because I've done Fit to Fat to Fit, and I've done a lot of inner work on myself to understand what addiction really is. I would say, after the first month or so, your body adjusts and adapts to these, I'll call them drugs, these highly processed junk foods, because you do get a release of quite a bit of dopamine eating these foods like you would doing drugs. And I'm not saying it's the same. Food addiction is not the same as, a drug addiction, but the mechanisms, the behind every addiction is pain. And I love Dr. Gabor Mate, who mentions that, instead of asking why the addiction, ask why the pain. Everyone is trying to escape some type of pain, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, and food or drugs or alcohol or certain substances do a very good job of temporarily relieving that pain. And I learned firsthand from doing this experiment and my second one in 2020, why people escape. We all escape as humans. Life gets tough. We go through, challenging things, traumas, abuses, emotional pains of life. And it's so much easier to escape or numb ourselves with food, drugs, or alcohol or whatever else. Sex, porn, movies, TV shows, social media. Like there's so many mechanisms to be used as an escape or a numbing mechanism. And it's so much easier to do that than it is to sit with the pain, work through it, and relieve ourselves of that pain through whether it's religion or therapy or prayer or meditation or breath work, or there's lots of different ways of healing from the pain. I love the quote by Rumi. He says the cure for pain is in the pain. So this is what I'm talking about, is most of the population probably just gravitates towards escaping through these substances, which I got, I understand so much better now. But so many people would rather do that than face the pain, sit with it, learn from it, and grow from it. That's the hard work, and it's like working out. Like, yes, we know working out and eating healthy food is good for physical health, but Why doesn't everyone do it? Because it's easier to escape the pain than to face it. And to do the hard and comfortable work in the moment it feels like work. It feels like, I don't want to do that. Like therapy or, talk about my emotions. I can't do, that's too hard. I'll go work, I'll go eat this food though, or drink this alcohol or take this drug, which will temporarily relieve it, but then it just suppresses. So anyways, that's kind of what I learned from that. And the cravings were intense and they taught me a lot. And I have so much respect now for people that struggle with it. And I have so much empathy as well for people that get stuck in that vicious cycle.
Yeah. And I'd love to hear about how you work through that with clients. But before we get there, physically, how
Yes.
did you feel mentally? Brain fog? What was happening there? Like emotionally, tell us what happened to you during this time.
So
And was
physically,
it different the both times?
good question. So physically, when you eat this food, initially it feels good. It tastes good. It feels good. So you get a quick boost of energy. And like I said, the food tastes delicious to your taste buds and your brain. So it gives you that dopamine. You feel good. But then the after effect is, things like indigestion, bloating. It affects your blood sugar levels. So you get these huge spikes in blood sugar and these huge crashes. And you do that multiple times per day. It's exhausting on your body. So you're constantly fatigued. Your sleep is disrupted. Your sleep patterns are disrupted, which affects your hormones, which affects your energy levels. It affects your mood. It affects your ability to show up your best self. Like your ability to handle stress is severely diminished when your cortisol is through the roof all day long. And it creates havoc on your physical body. But the relief from that is more food. So I think that's what people get stuck in, of like, oh, I feel miserable. Oh, I'm starving again. Like my blood sugar is dropping. I feel sick. And you're like, I need something now. Well, give me a donut or a Twinkie, which will give me quick energy versus like, let me cut up some chicken and cut up some broccoli and make a salad. Like that takes time and more prep and it's more expensive. So I get why people gravitate towards the path of least resistance, which is the highly processed junk foods. So I think that's kind of the physical part that I noticed. And then the mental part, that's what was really shocking to me, was how much of my journey was mental and emotional. Feeling lethargic, not being able to show up your best self, really, really affects you. If you're a parent, if you have kids, or you're in a relationship, if you aren't in good physical health, it's really hard to show up your best self, to like sit there and listen and be present, because you're not feeling your best. When you're not feeling your best physically, it's really hard to show up mentally and emotionally for those who need you, because you're going through your own challenges with dealing with your physical health issues. And so mentally, emotionally, I think was the biggest surprise. And the differences between the two journeys, I would say this is, I did my first one when I was 31. So I was a lot younger, different metabolism, different hormones, I lost the weight, got back in shape, 6 months of gaining, 6 months of losing. When I did it again in 2020, I did it as a 40-year-old because I wanted to give people in their 40s and 50s hope. Yes, it can be harder, but it's still possible. And so I wanted to do it again in 2020, which was a very divisive time for the world. And I wanted to teach people the importance of empathy, not just for others, but for ourselves. And that's kind of what the message behind the second journey was. As far as the difference between the two, that's a really good question. I would say my level of understanding severely increased the second time around. I was more self-aware. I was a lot less self-conscious. I was able to take my shirt off in public and own my dad bod, if you will. The first journey, I was so self-conscious, I wouldn't take my shirt off in public. I was so concerned about what other people thought about me. And after having, done a lot of work on myself, I realized that, look, this is a temporary phase where I'm going to be overweight temporarily, and I'm just going to rock the dad bod and just be cool with it. So I was totally fine taking my shirt off and having fun. And I didn't get too sad or depressed about my body being that way. Because I was like, you know what? I know eventually I'll get back to fit, because I've done it before. I kind of trusted the process. But it also came at a cost of, I went through a really bad breakup during my second journey with my girlfriend at the time. And it gave me a whole new understanding of emotional eating because I was eating the food to gain the weight initially. After the breakup, I was sad. I was lonely. I was depressed. I was hurt. And there's something about some Ben and Jerry's ice cream and some wine and some chocolate that it temporarily relieves the pain. And I understand now why people gravitate towards that food versus like, oh, I'm sad. Let me have some salmon and some, salad. That doesn't do the same thing when you like are. And so I understand emotional eating so much better now because I went through that experience, like having gone through a breakup. So they were similar in some ways, but different in other ways. At the end of the day, I learned so much empathy for people that struggle from both experiments. But they were structured slightly differently in my approach to gaining the weight and losing weight. Like, for example, in my second journey in 2020, I did experiments with 4 popular diets: keto, paleo, vegan, and vegetarian. A lot of people don't know this, but I did those diets in an unhealthy way to gain the weight for a week at a time. So I did keto, dirty keto, like an unhealthy version of keto, if you will, like a bunch of keto junk foods. Same thing with paleo, same thing with vegan, same thing with vegetarian, because I really wanted to show people, like, just because you are on these diets doesn't mean you're going to be healthier, because there's so much, keto, keto pizzas and keto ice creams and vegan cookies and, paleo pancakes and, vegetarian food that you could have, like mac and cheese. You can have cereal all day, and there's candies that are vegan. So I wanted to show the unhealthy sides of these diets and to let people know, like, just because you're in these categories doesn't mean that like all this food is healthy for you. There's so much processed junk food that falls into those categories of those diets. And I did my blood work before and after to show people, like, hey, there's an unhealthy way to do them and there's a healthy way to do them. And I kind of showed that on the second experiment in 2020.
What were your bloods? What were you
So
surprised about?
I'll go my triglycerides. So under 100 is really good for your triglyceride levels, right? I'll just keep it very basic. When I started, I was in like the 40s, right? Very good, very healthy, triglyceride levels. After I did dirty keto, they were still decent. They were still under 100. They went up to 70. Then I did dirty paleo, and my triglycerides went to like 130 or something like that. So they started to go up a little bit. But I was eating paleo, which isn't, I would say, super unhealthy. It was just a lot of like fruit juices and paleo bars and, like I said, paleo pancakes. Then I did dirty vegan, and my triglycerides went from like 130 to like 450. And that's what was like so surprising to me. So surprising. And then I did dirty vegetarian, and it went up to 530. So, which these are like insanely high numbers, and a lot of people don't really get their blood work done. But yeah, that's what the biggest surprise was, I would say, with that diet experiment that I did.
That's insane. So what do you put that down to, like, with the vegan
Yeah,
diet?
I kind
Vegan
of
bad diet, that is.
vegan bad diet. Because I'm not saying a vegan diet. Because what I did on the journey back to fit is actually revisited these diets and showed people, okay, if
Yeah,
you're going to do
amazing.
keto, paleo, vegan, or vegetarian, here's the healthy way to do them. Because there is a healthy way to be vegan, I would say.
Of course.
And that's what I did. I showed both sides of it. But it was shocking. But the people like that were vegan or used to be vegan would reach out and tell me, like, yeah, there's so much vegan junk food, right? Oreos technically are vegan. So people are like, oh, I can have Oreos and be a vegan? Like, awesome. Like, I'm just going to, we still gravitate towards comfort foods because of the behavior. Like I said, when people are going through emotional pain, it's easy to gravitate toward these comfort foods, but to be like, well, I'm vegetarian or I'm paleo or vegan. Like, I'm going to eat this one, which is less which is less unhealthy than the regular version, but you're still eating a lot of like sugary, highly processed junk foods in those categories.
Mm.
And as Americans, we love those comfort foods, and that's what's hard for people, and that's what I wanted to demonstrate.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think people would potentially listen to this and go, well, if you're eating not so great over time, there's going to be a compounding effect anyway. But the jump from, I mean, that is so extreme, the jump.
Yeah, it was
It's
crazy.
really interesting. So with those diets, did you do them for 4 weeks each?
I did it for a week at a time.
When you did start to lose the weight,
Yes.
was there anything, and you did the healthy versions of the weight, were the numbers as significant as when you did the not so great version compared to the losing of the weight?
Yeah, they weren't as extreme. Like, for example, when I did dirty vegan, dirty vegetarian, which were kind of the unhealthiest ones when I did them, the dirty version, when I did them healthy, the healthy way, they were all pretty much consistently healthy throughout. I mean, maybe my triglycerides were a little bit higher on vegan vegetarian just because they're more carb heavy, I would say, than keto and paleo, at least the way I ate. Because my body responds really well to a lower carb type of lifestyle. Not necessarily keto, even though I did do keto during my journey and intermittent fasting in 2020. I didn't do that method in 2011 though. In 2011, my method was more of like a paleo-ish approach with like 5 or 6 small meals throughout the day. In 2020, I did two bigger meals per day, if you will, with one meal at lunch, one meal at dinner, and fasted. I did intermittent fasting. So my body generally does well on a lower carb approach, but not necessarily keto. So eating, vegan, a lot of the foods I would eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, and that probably, had my triglycerides a little bit higher. I wouldn't say it's necessarily unhealthy. Like it was not in the 400s, that's for sure. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there wasn't anything like extreme or that surprised me. It was, my blood work was still pretty healthy.
Yeah, incredible. So let's talk about everything that you've learned and how you apply that to your work and working with clients. Um, Earlier you said that if you're not feeling good, then you're not going to show up as your best self. So if you've got a client who's been overweight, let's just say all their life, and they don't feel good, they are always tired, how do you have that conversation with them? Like,
Yeah.
how do you start the process with them in this journey?
Yeah. There's a good quote that I love to say to people when they first get started with me. And it kind of has to go with it. It goes in line with this. It says, if you don't heal what hurts you, you're going to bleed on those who didn't cut you. And what that means to me is if you don't heal the pains, the traumas, as unfair as it was to you, if you don't heal that, you're going to continue to bleed on those who didn't cut you. So like the people who are innocent, your spouse, your kids, your family, your friends, they're not the ones who hurt you, right? But they're the ones who you're taking it out on. And so that's why it's so important to show up your best self. One, because you deserve it, but two, because they deserve it too. They deserve the best version of you, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I think that's kind of where I like to start with people. Is I think a lot of people, when it comes to their physical health, whether they're aware of it or not, for a lot of people, it has to do with their self-worth, their level of self-love. And that doesn't mean that if you love yourself, you'll be skinny, and if you don't love yourself, you'll be overweight. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. It's not that black and white. What I'm saying is I want you to realize that you're worthy of good physical health. Whatever your version of healthy looks like, your version of healthy on your body is going to look different than my version of healthy on my body. But you are the one who determines, not society, not me, not anyone else. You determine what the best version of you physically is. And when you start to develop self-love, and I'll talk about how to do that, and you realize your level of worthiness, you start wanting to you're wanting to treat your body with kindness. And so those things that you used to see as a chore or a punishment, like eating healthy food versus eating junk food, or exercising versus laying on the couch, you start to see those things that you used to see as a chore or punishment as acts of self-love, of you showing up for yourself because you're worthy of the change that those hard and uncomfortable things are going to bring into your life. And so that's kind of where I start with people, is helping them develop that self-love and that self-worth. But the first step is self-awareness. There's a good quote by Anthony DeMello, and he says, what you're aware of, you're in control of, and what you're not aware of is in control of you. And so it goes hand in hand with the quote by Carl Jung, who said, until you make the unconscious conscious, you will continue to live your life and call it fate. And what he means by that, and I probably butchered that quote, but it's something along those lines. Until you become aware of what you do and why you do it, you're going to continue with the subconscious programming that your brain has developed over the past 30, 40, 50 years, from the way your parents raised you to teachers and coaches and religious leaders and movies and books and TV shows and music have all kind of programmed your brain to react a certain way to certain stimulus. And so the first level of getting started with someone is to build their self-awareness. And there's a really good book by Oprah called What Happened to You. I love reframing the question, which a lot of people tend to ask internally, what's wrong with me? Or they might see someone else and be like, what's wrong with that person? Instead of asking what's wrong with me or what's wrong with you, ask what happened to you. And that's the name of the book by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry, What Happened to You? Because if you can go back and realize and figure out what happened to you to figure out why you are the way you are and why you do what you do, then you can start to become aware of those triggers and your reactions to those triggers. And then you can start to be in control of how you respond. And another good quote by Viktor Frankl from the book Man's Search for Meaning, he said, between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is where you have your power to choose. So what I help my clients do is to become self-aware. That's the very first step, to create space between stimulus and response. Most of us are triggered, we react. We're triggered, we react. So kids are stressing me out, grab a glass of wine, get into an argument with my spouse, eat this food that makes me temporarily feel better, right? We look for these ways to escape or numb the pain of the stress that we're feeling in the moment. And we've programmed our brain for the past 20 years, 30 years to I'm so stressed out, overwhelmed with work. What do I do in this situation? Your brain knows. It's very smart. It's like, well, this is what we do. We've always done this. We always reach for the alcohol or the food, or maybe we scroll through social media or whatever the unhealthy habit is that you're trying to break. And so the key is to create space between stimulus and response. And the more space you create, the more power you have to choose. You're able to push pause, observe what's happening, think through it, and then thoughtfully respond. That right there is the key to transformation. That right there is how you go from, if you want to change your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, your financial health, is becoming aware and then creating that space. And the more space you create, you can thoughtfully respond. And that's kind of what I help my clients do. Yes, I give them meal plans and workouts and macros and all that stuff that goes along with it. But on top of that, we're kind of combining that with tools that help people to create that space. So self-awareness is the first step. The second step is self-acceptance, meaning developing compassion for yourself, developing empathy for yourself. And those old versions of you that maybe messed up for the past 30 plus years, having compassion instead of hating those versions of you or hating those parts of you, thinking if I hate myself enough, then maybe I'll change. A lot of people out there probably use self-hate as a motivating tool to break bad habits. And I think it can work for a season or two, right? I don't think it works for everyone long-term. And the journey is not as fun when you hate yourself. My approach of what I'm trying to do is a self-love approach. And I believe self-love can be just as motivating as self-hate, but it makes the journey so much more enjoyable because it doesn't make it about the results, right? When we use self-hate, it's like, if I get this result, then I'll be happy. Then I'll love myself. Yeah. Then people will love me. Then people will respect me. And what I'm trying to do is teach people you're lovable now. If you can learn to love yourself as imperfect as you are and develop that self-love now and realize that you can use that self-love to motivate you to do the hard things that you want to do, because you know that when you treat your body with kindness, you exercise, you eat healthy, you'll admit that you do feel better in the long run. You sleep better, you have better skin, better digestion, more energy, more focus. Everything improves, but you got to sacrifice the short-term, happiness for the long-term fulfillment. And that's kind of where the self-worth and self-love comes into place. And that's kind of my approach to helping people, is this conscious fitness approach is what I call it. And conscious fitness is not about self-hate. It's not about just discipline and willpower and pushing through. It's about self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love, and using that as motivation to change those thought patterns and create that space. And then being able to thoughtfully respond of how you want to react in certain situations, and being more in the conscious mind than in the subconscious mind.
That's got to be one of the best and most beautiful explanations of getting healthy and starting this fitness journey that I've ever heard in my life. So number one, thank you. And you're like, the whole self-hate as a motivator. I mean, I believe we've all seen it, and we've all recognized it in the people around us. And it is because of, well, I mean, it can be for a lot of different reasons. And one of them is, what we're exposed to through social media, through journalism, through whatever it is. And the problem with self-hate and when this happens, I'll be this, is that line always gets pushed further away. Like, you'll reach it, and then it's the next thing. And that is the problem with it. And that's why I'm so happy that you are bringing light to this very important approach to health and well-being and this fitness journey, because that is the start, that is the beginning. So I'd love to know, when you have clients who are going through this process and they come to you and go, I messed up this week. There's so much stress, so much happened, and I couldn't stick to the meal plan. Like, what is that conversation through that moment?
Yeah. The first thing that happens for me is curiosity is the first word that comes to mind. Compassionate curiosity, I would say. Because if you're as a trainer, as a coach, this is what I've learned over the years is when people, there's another good quote. Sorry, I'm like quoting all these things.
I love quotes.
Teddy Roosevelt, he said, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And that's really what Fit to Fed to Fit, my conscious fitness approach, is all about. Is no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. As a coach, as a trainer, I want to get curious about why they are the way they are. And so I want to dig deep about, okay, tell me what happened in that moment. Tell me everything about it. And there is magic in making someone feel seen, heard, and understood. And if they know that if they feel seen, heard, and understood, they're going to feel safe with you. And if they feel safe with you, they're going to tell you everything that happened. They're going to tell you where their mind was in that moment. Versus if they can tell you're judgmental, they're going to sniff that out. If they can tell you're asking with judgment, they're going to be like, oh, defense is up. I got to look perfect in front of this person. Maybe let me make up an excuse that will make that person like me and blah, blah, blah. Versus this is who I am. This is what is. This is what happened. Awesome. Let's dig deep into that. Let's figure out what happened before, during, after. Get curious, ask questions, dig deeper to figure out why. Like what happened to you? What happened to them? Instead of what's wrong with you? Why don't you just do it, right? I think that's the lack of empathy that exists in the fitness industry. And so this is why developing empathy is an art, in my opinion, and making someone feel seen and heard and understood is an art, in my opinion, as well. And it's medicine to their soul when they feel safe and seen with someone like a coach and a trainer. So if something does happen, awesome, let's talk about it. There's no judgment. And also, it's teaching them not to judge themselves, of teaching them, like, because there's judgment on that, they shame themselves, they guilt themselves, and that's kind of the vicious cycle of transformation that they're used to. And so my hope is to get them to not judge themselves either. But it starts with me and the way I ask the questions and peel back the layers so that they can tell me, you know what? Yeah, I didn't sleep well the night before. I got into an argument. I'm stressed out over bills. This is what's going on in my life. Like I'm my divorce or my marriage is falling apart. And then it's like, oh, that makes so much sense. And this is why, and bring it back full circle to our first, half of our podcast of doing the inner work, because someone's ability to show up and do the physical stuff, like following the meal plan, is going to be determined by their mental and emotional state. And so that's why there's so much conversation around where is your mental and emotional state? How is your heart today? And figuring out like what is going on in their life to better understand why they're not choosing to show up for themselves. And that's really what it comes down to is helping them realize that them following the meal plan isn't for me, the coach, to be like, I need you to be perfect, but it's for them to learn how to like this following the meal plan is for you to show up for yourself. You doing the workout is for you to show up for yourself. It's an act of self-love. So what is keeping you from loving yourself? What is keeping you from realizing that you're worthy of good physical health? And there are legit reasons. Like I, as a single parent, I totally get survival mode. Like I totally understand when people are in survival mode and their main priority isn't, getting a six pack. It's surviving with 3 or 4 kids, paying bills, laundry, meal prepping, working out, all those things they know they're supposed to do. But I'll be totally honest with you, there's certain phases or seasons of people's lives where as much as they want to look that way, they're going to have to sacrifice maybe time with their kids or time with their spouse or time from work to make that thing a priority. And not everyone has the same support system. Like I'll just give a perfect example. Someone that's a full-time single parent that doesn't get to share custody with their kids, that doesn't get a break from their kids, that is not the same as someone who has a spouse that is supportive, that helps with meal prep and helps with grocery shopping and helps like take the kids to and from school, and like you divide and conquer. For someone that's a single parent, I'll be totally honest with them and be like, look, I have so much empathy for you of where you're at, and I understand why you're struggling right now. And maybe this season of life, your priority is just to survive, and that's okay. And when life gets a little bit easier, where you have a little bit of room to make more time for yourself to go to the gym and meal prep, maybe we just dial it up a little bit and turn the intensity up when life gets a little bit easier. But for right now, you're struggling to pay bills, you're struggling to stay sane. Maybe just going for a walk every day is kind of like, okay, I'm going to show up for myself by going for a walk. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And that's kind of what I try and help people realize with where they're at in their life. People are like, I want the six pack, but I also have all this like, divorce I'm going through and bills and bankruptcy and like all this drama. And it's hard to do it all. So it depends on the person's individual situation. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I want to know is, how do you start this entire process with someone who has a lot going on mentally, who has had lots of stuff happen in their life, and all they want to do is get the meal plan and just tell me what to do and I'll go do it. But really, it's that other stuff that needs to be worked with, but they're like, nah, I want to do this. How do you kind of, I guess, guide them through this entire process?
Yeah. You have to meet them where they're at. And I think that's a huge, super important step of meet them where they're at. Not everyone's on the same level of self-awareness or on the same, chapter of, doing the inner work and healing their old wounds, because some people haven't even started that journey, right? Some people just like suppressed for their whole life all those emotions. And this is why I'm such a huge fan of breath work, by the way, because I think breath work is a great healing modality to help people release some of those pent up emotions so that they can think more clearly. But if someone's just like, hey, Drew, give me the meal plan, I just want to focus on the physical, let's not talk about our feelings. I'm like, okay, if that's where you want to start, let's start there. But then if they continue to struggle with, not being able to stay consistent, I follow the program, and then they beat themselves up with shame and guilt, I'll talk to them like, how does this feel for you? And most of the time it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming because people don't realize everything comes at a cost. To gain better physical health comes at a cost of you having to sacrifice maybe some certain things in life that you love to do. And you think, well, if I get this body, that's going to make me happier than, spending more time at work or spending time with my kids or my family or whatever it is. And I think everyone has their own level of what I call a happy balance of like, okay, you think you're going to be happier at 10% body fat, but really looking at all the things you have to do to achieve 10% body fat, are you really going to be happier? Counting your calories, counting your macros, following these workouts, sacrificing sleep maybe. Is it really going to make you happier looking this way? And I think that's where like people learning how to be honest with themselves and setting an intention of like, why do I want to lose the weight? Why do I want this body? And really digging deep and figuring out why they want that in the first place. A lot of people don't even know why they want that. They've just been programmed to want that because society is like, hey, if you look this way, we'll praise you. We'll give you value. We'll make you feel worthy if you look a certain way. And people are like, oh, that'll make me happy. And then they get it and they're still not happy. Like you said, like the goalpost keeps moving. Like, well, that wasn't it. Maybe if I get more money or if I get more women or if I get more cars or if I get more this or that, like maybe it's this thing outside of me that will fill this void that I've been trying to fill. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Gosh, Drew, this has been such a wholesome conversation. It's been so fantastic.
Deep. Very deep.
Would you do this again? Like in terms of the whole put on weight, like, or do you feel like, and it really does sound like you've, learnt so much and been through so much and now really do provide something so beautiful to clients. But would you do this again?
That's a good question. So people asked me that after the first one, and I swore for years I would never do it again. And then I ended up doing it. So this time I'm going to say I don't know but I don't foresee myself. I don't foresee it happening.
Yeah.
I don't foresee it happening. And I have no plans of doing it in the near future.
But never say never.
At the same time, I don't want to jinx myself and say I'll never do it.
How'd I get here? Do you know what?
Exactly.
I think it would be really interesting to see you do this whole process again. I'll just put it out there. But instead of not doing no exercise, do the exercise as normal, but you're still eating not so great. And I'd really would love to know, number one, if you put on weight, how much, how do you feel, like how do you perform, all of the things. I think that would just be an interesting experiment.
How about if I do it, you do it too? There you go.
So we won't be seeing that. Sorry, folks.
You're so funny. I don't know. We'll see. I'm 43. My daughter's getting older. As you get older, you start to realize, I gotta like focus on my health. But like I said, I'm open to experiments. I'm always doing like some kind of experimentation on my body. But extreme experiments like that's I'll have to think about that one. But thank you for the
Sure. This has been amazing, Drew. If people want to find you, follow you, and potentially even work with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, right now it's super simple. It's just fit fat fit is my social media brand, my website, my podcast, my first book. You can just follow me at fit fat to fit. I'm working on creating another brand called Conscious Fitness that's coming in the near future. But it's a transition right now. So right now it's just fit to fat to fit. I do host conscious fitness retreats here on the Big Island of Hawaii. If people are interested in actually having like a hands-on experience with me on this beautiful island, that's a possibility for October of 2024. The August one's already sold out, but there's another one coming up in October if people are interested in that.
Brilliant. Sounds amazing. I have one more question for you, and then I'm going to throw it over to you. The last question is, what is your message to people right now who are wanting to start this journey to losing weight and loving themselves?
Yeah, I would say this is, if you are a person like I used to be that has always used maybe self-hate, willpower, discipline to try and like motivate yourself to change parts of you, maybe give self-love a try for the first time. Maybe give it a try and see how it works, see how it fits, and see if that lands or resonates with you. If you've never tried it before and you've tried everything else, you've tried to like willpower yourself even more, maybe give it on, maybe try it on for size.
Beautiful.
So that's what I would say.
Amazing. Drew, what question would you like to ask this listener today so they can get thinking or self-reflecting?
Yeah, I would say, what's one thing you can do every single day, and maybe even journal this, of like, what did I do today to show up for myself? What did you do to show up for yourself? Whether that's, it doesn't have to be exercise or eat vegetables. It could be like, I spent time with my, quality time with my son or daughter, and I just listened to them, or I played video games with them, or connected with them and was present with them. Or maybe I showed up for myself by doing a breath work or a meditation or reading a book. That can be showing up for yourself as well. Like, look at these things that you used to see as chores or punishments, try and see them as ways of showing up for yourself, and ask yourself at the end of the day, what did I do today to show up for myself? And I think that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Drew, this has been so lovely. Thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been awesome.
My pleasure.
I hope you loved that episode. It was so fantastic. It was so much fun for me to have this conversation with Drew. You never hear of it. The only time you hear about weight loss or the fitness industry is about getting fit. It's about getting big or bulky or running a marathon or whatever it is. You don't hear of the reverse happening. So I just thought it was such an intriguing and fascinating story. So I hope you got so much from that. If you want to work with Drew, go check out his website. He's got an app, he's got meal plans, he's got so much there. And obviously, as you heard, it's more than just the meal plan. It's more than just the exercises that you're doing. So go check him out. He's awesome. And I would love for you to take a screenshot of this episode if you're listening to it on the podcast, or maybe you're listening to this on the YouTube channel. Big thumbs up to you guys. Press subscribe. As always, stay awesome, do awesome things, and enjoy, be good. We'll catch you in the next one.